Hello, ladies. We are back for part two, and I want to go over now the act and ask. And so in the first video, we talked a lot about essentially what your body was going through and being able to acknowledge that your body has been through a lot through pregnancy, through delivery, and now postpartum, and really truly understanding what it's going to take and the timeline that it's going to take to help support healing of your body. Okay. Today, we're going to talk about how to act on that. So what do you actually do? What are the tangible things you can do to pull in to support your body? Okay, so we're going to start with nutrition and hydration. So we're going to kind of loop these into one. Starting with hydration. Hydration is something that seems simple, but is actually challenging. It's the thing that we tend to forget the most. If you're not somebody who is really good about being cognizant of how much water you were drinking throughout the day previous to being postpartum, it's really challenging to do it now. So, especially if you're breastfeeding, understanding that the majority of your body is made up of water, which we all know this, we were taught this when we were kids, but to really, really understand that at the baseline, you should be consuming half your body weight in ounces every day. And that's not talking about when you're sweating, or when you're breastfeeding, or when you're losing copious amounts of liquids on top of just everyday function. So the need for hydration goes up from there. And hydration doesn't just come in the form of water, but it's also electrolytes. So making sure we get the potassium and the sodium and the magnesium, that's really, really important to help with that actual human fluid, which isn't just made up of water, but also these minerals, these electrolytes as well. Okay. So if you are somebody who maybe you drink pop, you drink juice, you drink these other items, really, really focus on, can I replace these items with water? Not in a sense of I'm trying to, not that it's not a bad idea to be conscientious of your sugar intake and things like that, but more so because we want to make sure that you're properly hydrated. And sometimes these items can actually further dehydrate us. So really, really important for us to focus on that. I'm going to put a caveat on there. And that is that the majority of the water that you consume, the liquids that you consume throughout the day, should be done in between your meals instead of at your meals. If you're somebody who drinks a lot of water while you're eating your food, I want to encourage you to start to do it first thing in the morning. When you first wake up, you should be drinking a large glass of water before you eat or drink anything else, including your coffee, ladies. And then in between breakfast and lunch, and in between lunch and dinner, and then after dinner. Okay. The reason we don't want to have copious amounts of liquid while we're eating our food is that it can actually suppress our stomach acidity. And we want a high amount of acidity in our stomach while we're digesting food, because that's what that helps to do, is digest our food. So if we're diluting that acidity with a bunch of water or another beverage, then we can actually mess with proper digestion, and that's not what we want. So a good rule of thumb would be to drink right when you wake up, and then in between your meals. And the first goal is to get half your body weight, and then it goes up from there depending on what else you've got going on in your day. Okay. All right. Next is nutritional needs. So one, you need more nutrients postpartum than you did when you were prenatal, before getting pregnant, including pregnancy. Okay. You actually need more. One, because you're coming from a state of injury. You have a major wound, which I talked about in the first video. You have a wound the size of a dinner plate inside your abdomen. So even though you can't see it, it's there. It's the size of a dinner plate inside your abdomen after you give birth. So your nutrients go up. Your body doesn't just heal if it's not given anything to heal. So we need to pull in nutrients to make sure that we're healing. Okay. If you are also breastfeeding, we need to make sure we're getting even more. Your baby actually gets more nutrients from you breastfeeding than it did when it was inside of you. So really, really important for us to make sure that we're increasing our nutrients postpartum. So this means the quality of your food and the quantity of your food. This is not the time to be trying to crash diet. It's not the time to be eating junk food. It is the time to really, really pull in restorative, nourish-dense food. So when it comes to vitamins, minerals, proteins, healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, water, and all of these things, we want to make sure that we're having all of these at each of our meals. Animal products are a mainstay if possible. They come with really wonderful proteins, wonderful healthy fats, and a lot of the minerals that are really helpful to replenish, especially after we lost a bunch of blood when giving birth. So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, definitely something that we should have a deeper conversation about when it comes to pulling in nutrients that we would normally find in animal products. And if you're not going to consume those food products, we need to be able to dive a little bit deeper and figure out a way to get you those nutrients in. Okay. In most cultures, there's two things that they focus on when it comes to postpartum nutrients, postpartum nutrition. Two items: animal foods and warmed foods. Okay, these are the two things across the continents, from country to country, from thousands of years ago up to today. When it comes to food, when it comes to healing, when it comes to postpartum, they focus on animal foods and warmed foods. The reason that warmed foods are really important is because, one, it can pull out a lot of nutrients in the food. Okay. Two, cooked vegetables, slow cooked meats, things that are soaked in bone broths, stuff like that, are actually a lot easier on your digestive system. And when we are postpartum, we want to make sure that the majority of our energy is going towards healing our body. If our body has to do a lot of work to break down our food, then we're taking away from our responsibility to focus on healing our uterus and things like that. So really important on prioritizing these at every meal. Do I have a good source of protein, a good source of animal protein? And is my food warmed and cooked? Is it soothing? Okay. So think soups and stews and chilies and things like that. Okay. So again, to kind of reiterate why this is important, after delivery, your internal tissues are severely damaged. That is a fact. So these tissues need protein to repair. Protein is a building block for our tissue. So think of it like as bricks to a house. We need these bricks in order to build up the structure of the house. That's what proteins, amino acids do. So they're really important in that healing process. The reason that we really prioritize protein from animals is because, one, it's a complete protein. It's really helpful to have that collagen, which is going to help when it comes to connective tissue, bone, skin, things like that. And then, as well as, it's packed with minerals that are really important, right? So especially thinking of like iron, vitamin B12, these are all things that we get depleted of after labor because we bleed. When we're not only birthing a baby, we're also birthing an organ. And so there's a lot of nutrient depletion that happens. Energy needs go up during recovery from birth. So warmed foods are easier to digest, doesn't waste energy trying to beat down these foods, especially when it comes to your plants. So vegetables, plants in general, they are harder to digest raw in a raw form than in a cooked form. So your soups, your stews, your stir fries, your chilies, things like that are actually going to be easier to digest. So really helpful to pull in. So here's a list. I'm not going to name off everything, but here's a list you can take a snapshot of when it comes to some of the foods to focus on. I like to focus on quality first. I like to focus on, am I getting in a good variety and a good amount of these types of foods? Am I making sure that when I'm looking at my breakfast and my lunch and my dinner, my meals throughout the day and the week, that they incorporate these foods most of the time? I am not expecting perfection, nor should you. We should absolutely make sure that we have time for pleasure. We should absolutely make sure that we have time for those foods. I highly recommend that when you're choosing pleasurable foods, you still try to choose foods that don't make you feel like junk. If you don't do well with gluten, I would stay away from gluten because you don't feel good afterwards. And again, you want your body has to pick and choose. If you're eating something that doesn't agree with you, that you don't tolerate well, that your body doesn't like to have inside of it, then your body then has to choose, am I going to put my energy towards dealing with this item, or am I going to put it towards healing my uterus and healing my body from pregnancy and birth? it's probably going to choose the item that you just consumed. So we want it more times than not to be able to choose to heal over here. Okay. Next, we're going to dive into, and I should say, as you get further into your postpartum, so especially I would say the first 6 to 8 months, this is not the time to be slashing your calories. This is not the time to be cutting down on your carbs. Carbs are super important. This is the time to really focus on nutrients and pulling in as much nutrients as you need. We want to make sure that we're doing this for a significant amount of months, because especially if you're breastfeeding, because we want to make sure it doesn't compromise our milk supply. And if you are not eating enough, one of two things can happen. One, it can either compromise your milk supply, or two, your body will pull from other nutrients in your body to then give your milk supply what it needs. So this is where we come in with skin issues. We come in with really low energy. We come in with a lot of like anxiety, depression. We come in with hair loss. These are all the things where it's like, okay, our body can't focus on all these other areas and keep you alive and give baby nutrients. So it's got to make a choice. And so this is, again, really, really focusing on giving yourself at least that amount of time to make sure that you are eating maintenance level and that you are pulling in max amount of nutrients. After that time, and I highly recommend you don't do this alone. I highly recommend that you work with a professional. If you are postpartum and you're at the point where you are that 6 to 8 months out and you're like, okay, I want to lose some weight. Like I lost that initial baby weight of the actual baby coming out of me and the placenta coming out of me and the inflammation going down and the swelling. And because we all kind of lose like an initial amount of weight, but then kind of where you kind of hold still for a little while in those next months. When you reach that point where you're thinking, is it time for me to go into a deficit? Is it time for me to focus on some weight loss? Please hire a professional, and not just any nutritionist. Hire somebody who is specialized in postpartum, because they are going to be able to make sure that, one, it's the right time based off of several different factors. Are you sleeping through the night? How are you doing when it comes to energy? How are you doing when it comes to exercise? How are you doing when it comes to all these other areas that are going to impact you? And then they're going to be able to tell you, this would be a safe time for us to pull into a deficit. This is exactly how we'll do it. Or they'd be able to tell you, this isn't the safe time. You should wait a little bit longer. And so really, really making sure that you have guidance there, because if we do go into a deficit too quickly, there are ramifications. And we see these often when it comes to your hormone function. And then eventually your metabolism will suffer. And so these are from individuals who are like, now I'm 2 years postpartum and I can't seem to lose weight unless I'm eating 1,100 calories. And so that's because we tried losing weight probably a little bit too quickly or too aggressively or for whatever reason. And so now our metabolism has adjusted to that. So definitely important to pull in the right expert to be able to help support you there. Okay, so now let's dive into the movement. So number one, and listen, my background is exercise. That's my first love. And so this is something that I can speak fully to. I also was somebody who rushed back into exercise too quickly postpartum, and there are ramifications. So definitely want to make sure that I support you guys, you ladies, into doing this in the right way and creating the right path for you. So number one is the purpose of movement. The purpose of movement is not to lose weight. The purpose of movement is not to grow a bigger butt right now. That's not the purpose of movement. The number one purpose of movement in general at all times is to improve circulation. Improving circulation is the only way that we're going to get the nutrients where they need to go. So you eat the nutrients, you eat the vitamins, you eat the minerals, you breathe in the oxygen. And then we have to transport that nutrients from your digestive tract into your bloodstream, and from your bloodstream to the tissues in your body that need the healing. Okay. The less we move, the less circulation is optimal. So movement alone is really important. And that's why from the very beginning, focusing on walks, and things like that is going to be the best thing that you can do when it comes to helping your body from a movement perspective. Okay. So it's also really helpful to support your lymphatic drainage. So not everyone's familiar with the lymphatic system. You probably know what a lymph node is, but your lymphatic system runs very similar to your cardiovascular system. So same to like your veins and your arteries and your capillaries, like that's what carries your blood. Your lymphatic system has vessels as well that run throughout your body. And they collect and transport a lot of the drainage, a lot of like the waste of the body, right? So dead cells and excess hormones and everything that your body's no longer going to be using, it pulls it from the body to the lymph nodes, down into our lymphatic organs, and then back into our digestive system so we can poop and pee it out. Okay. So number one, why it's really important for us to have proper digestion and gut motility, which movement can also help with. But number two, your lymphatic system doesn't have a pump like your cardiovascular system does. Your cardiovascular system has your heart and it helps to pump and create some circulation. Okay. But your lymphatic system doesn't have that. So if we're spending a lot of time sitting still, lying down, things like that, which when we're very early postpartum, that needs to happen. But as we start to kind of move further into, the weeks and the months after that, then as we want to start to move more because we need that lymphatic drainage to help to move and then to get out of the body. Because if you hold on to that, then you're holding on to excess hormones, you're holding on to excess weight, and that's going to make you feel super crappy. Okay, number three is going to be bring posture back into alignment. So your posture gets really compromised when you're pregnant because we have to make room for baby. So your spine actually changes, your hips change, all of these things get thrown out of whack so that you can stay upright while you have this huge belly, right? So now we need to pull that back into alignment, and that doesn't just snap back. We have to be able to pull in movement to help us do that, okay? Number four is to help strengthen the pelvic floor and the core integrity. Your core and your pelvic floor keep all of your trunk, that whole middle part of your body, your pelvis, your ribs, everything in alignment. It's super important. That's a very important stabilizing entity. And so if pregnancy compromises that, birth compromises that, whether you give vaginal birth or C-section, they both get compromised. And then when it comes to walking, sitting, standing, moving around in bed, carrying things, including humans and all these stuff, everything gets compromised if we don't have good trunk stabilization. So really, really important to spend some time healing this area. And then progress back into exercise. A lot of people want to jump back into exercise first. And my first thought is, no, we need to get you walking first, and then we need to get you walking further, and then we need to focus on some other areas and then get you back into exercise. So I put down a little progression of movement. You start with some connection breaths and midline mobility. These can be done literally hours after you give birth. So for the first week or two, when we're spending a lot of time lying down, we're spending a lot of time sitting as we should, we're close to our bed as we should be, because we have a huge injury inside our abdomen, that we can do things like connection breaths, and we can do things like midline mobility that really, really help to bring that posture back into alignment. They really help create some connection in that pelvic floor and that core, again, that's been severed for so long. Okay. The next is to gradually move towards short walks. So as you move further into your postpartum phase, now we're getting a couple weeks out, think like 2 to 6 weeks out, you have these short walks. We're going for walks outside a little bit. We are moving around the house a little bit more. We're still staying close to home, but we're adding in those short walks. When you're walking, you're working against gravity. So that in and of itself is a challenge. We tend to take for granted how easy walking is. But if you've ever watched a toddler go from crawling to walking, it's really hard to create the stabilizing and postural muscles to support yourself in an upright position. All of that gets compromised when we're pregnant and after we give birth. So we're kind of doing that again, and reteaching ourselves how to walk properly because we were compensating, especially for the last couple of months of pregnancy. Then it's adding in those postural correction exercises. So making sure that spine's getting back into alignment, that pelvis is getting back into alignment, everything's feeling good. It's going to really, even ribs, your ribs can get flared out from pregnancy. So really making sure we're doing a bunch of corrective exercises first to be able to pull everything back, get the structure back where it needs to be. So then that way we can minimize pain, uncomfortableness, and then get you to the point where you can do some resistance stuff. Longer walks probably happen around the same time. So now we're getting further and further away from home. We're going for longer walks as your stamina increases. Pay attention to how your body feels during this time, preferably outside. And then you're moving into body weight stabilizing exercises. Then you're moving into resistant training. Then you're moving into strength training. And then you're moving into more explosive, like cardio and HIIT workouts, as well as your sports. Okay. So this takes months. This takes months. I remember this is what happened with me. I was a fitness professional and I was like, I'm going to get back into exercise quicker than anybody else. I'm going to feel so good. It's going to be great. And then I remember kind of getting back into strength training, like heavy strength training, because that's what I did, a couple months after I gave birth. And I was feeling awesome. I went back to work 6 weeks postpartum. I was doing all these things. And then I hit this plateau where I couldn't progress anymore. And I was like, why is this happening? And I struggled there for a while. And I started to have some pain in my back. It's incredible pain in my back, pain in my hips, pain coning in my abdomen. All these issues were happening. And I finally went to my pelvic floor PT. And I, at this point, was like almost a year postpartum. And she's like, you have to back off. You have to back off. You have to go back to these postural corrective exercises and back to these body weight stabilizing exercises. You need to stay there for longer. You need to stay there for longer until we can slowly get you back up here. And so I will say, like, I did this. I tried to rush it. And I know if you are somebody who loves exercise, this is going to be a challenging area for you to do this in the right manner. And this is, again, where it can be really, really helpful to pull in a professional who can sit there and guide you and is going to know maybe a little bit better on like when to move forward and when to hold back. Okay. So I have 4 tips here when it comes to kind of like things to keep in mind and things to focus on. No matter if you are newly postpartum or even if you're a year or 2 out, but you haven't done anything corrective wise, these are the things to focus on. So number 1 is your posture. We want to pull you back into neutral alignment. So when you're pregnant, think of this girl having a big old belly right here. So if she had a big belly, what happens is we tend to kind of like shift our hips forward and then pull our shoulders back to help to compensate for that big belly that we had. Well, if we don't do any corrective exercises postpartum, you're going to keep this posture. Also, this kind of like forward shoulder, head forward lean is also prominent when we see for breastfeeding moms, because you're just holding babies in general. You're holding babies, so now we're kind of crunched over and held over. And so this is the position that gets really, really mimicked a lot. So what we want is we want to have this more neutral posture. And so what I think about is having your ankles, your weight should be through your heels, not through your toes. As you can see, her hips are kind of shifted forward a little bit, and then her weight's probably closer to her toes than her heels. So the first thing you're gonna do is think about shifting your weight back into your heels. Then you're gonna think about stacking your hips right on top of those heels, stacking your shoulders right on top of those hips, and then stacking your ear right on top of the shoulder. So what this is going to help us do is it's going to help us shift our weight back, which then shifts our hips back. Pulling our shoulders back is going to give us that nice proud chest, and then pulling our head back versus having our head forward. This is proper alignment. And if you are someone who's probably like 6, 7, 8 months postpartum and you haven't thought about your posture in a while, doing this position is going to feel uncomfortable, which is a good sign that we need to work on it. So next is improve your core and your pelvic floor connection. I have worked with women who have high school aged kids, which means they've been dealing with core and pelvic floor weakness for decades, decade and a half. And we have pulled in the connection breaths and the core exercises that I do with my newly postpartum moms. So one is, it's never too late to start these things. Even if you are well into your later part of postpartum, it's still really important to pull these things in. I didn't list all the exercises here, but I definitely have access to some. So make sure that you reach out to me at the end of this, and I will send you over some resources. But this is where programming is super, super crucial and important. Okay. Third is progressive load of abdominal muscles. So this kind of is where, like, the reason working with a professional is so important is because you're going to have some people who try to go back into exercise too quickly. Then you're going to have other people who stay comfortable and stay too cautious for too long. And one of the things about exercise is that it requires us to put some progressive load on the muscle, to really challenge the muscle in order to get it to adapt and get stronger. What we need to make sure is that you're doing that appropriately. Okay, so context matters. What's going on with you matters. And so this is where, again, talking to professionals for us is really, really important. There's not a one size fits all. I have women who are 6 months postpartum, and we need to go back to focusing on posture. We need to go back to focusing on core and pelvic floor stuff because they tried to progress too quickly. I have other women who are at that point and they're staying stuck there, and I need to push them to go further. And so it just depends on the person, but these are the things to kind of make sure, everyone always says, listen to your body. But if you're not somebody who understands how your body works or can trust your own perspective, because maybe you're somebody who's like, I just always feel like I need to do more and do more, or you're somebody who's like, I don't like feeling uncomfortable, and so I don't push myself when it comes to exercise. Great. Those are 2 signs that you should be hiring a professional to help guide you through this. And last but not least, stop if you're experiencing any bulging in your linea alba. So your linea alba, I chose a picture that you could kind of still see this dark line. The linea alba is essentially your core muscles are not one muscle group. They are actually 2 muscle bellies on either side. And then in the center of your abdomen, there's a line of connective tissue that connects these guys together. Okay. So if you have one muscle belly on this side and one muscle belly on this side, they connect together. Okay. When we are pregnant, this tissue that connects these 2 muscle bellies is going to stretch and expand. Okay. So it's going to separate. It's also going to thin. Okay. And so that's this linea alba, this connective tissue that runs up and down. All right. So after you give birth, we need to do 2 things. We need to pull it back together, but we also need to thicken it. Okay. Because it's super thin. So we need to make sure that it gets thick so that the integrity is there. So if you are doing exercises in your postpartum, even if you're years postpartum, and you find that when you're trying to do either an abdominal exercise or an overhead exercise or any type of exercise where you're really bracing your core and you feel like there's a bulging happening or like a coning, essentially that means that we don't have good integrity of that tissue. So we need to back off from the movement, because what we're doing is we're causing a lot of pressure on that tissue. And if we cause too much pressure on that tissue, then we could potentially bust that tissue open. Okay. And so we can get things like umbilical hernias and things like that. So focusing on not just bringing the tissue the tissue closer together, because we're not always going to be able to get it back to where it was, but it's being able to really make sure that we're thickening that tissue so that we don't have that compromise. We don't have that pressure that's happening. So again, really, really important to get somebody who's an expert to help kind of guide this, to make sure that you are doing exercises appropriately. Okay. Next, sleep and stress. So I lab these into one area because even though they're 2 separate entities, stress is going to impact sleep. Sleep is going to impact stress. And so they definitely work together. Okay. So sleep is compromised. That's just a fact. Sleep is compromised until your baby is sleeping through the night, and you are able to do this as well. So this is also a thing that, first caveat is that we got to wait until baby is sleeping through the night, which for some people that's a few months. For some people that's way longer. For us, it was 9 months. And so we really, really have to make sure that you have to know that if baby's not sleeping through the night and you have to get up with baby, you're not sleeping through the night either. And your body is compromised then. I also run into a lot of moms who, even when their babies are able to sleep through the night, they're still not able to sleep through the night. And so then we have to make sure that we prioritize and fix that problem as well. Okay. So this means months of sleep deprivation, months. If you talk to anybody else besides the mother of a baby, months of sleep deprivation is excruciating. And it's excruciating for us. But again, I want you to recognize just how wonderful the mother's body is because she is designed that in the months after having a baby, she has the ability to function. It might not be super well, but she has the ability to function. Now, there's always a consequence. There's always a trade-off. Okay. And this is where that nervous system comes into play. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. So one big thing we need to understand, the only time your body can heal in any way, shape, or form, the only time is when you're sleeping. It's the only time. It's the only time cuts can heal. It's the only time the wound inside your abdomen can heal. It's the only time that your brain can de-inflame. It's the only time any tissue inside your body, anytime we are awake, every second, every moment we're awake, tissues are being damaged. Cells are dying. That's how the body works. The only time cell regeneration occurs is when we are sleeping. So if you have compromised sleep, we are messing with our body's ability to be able to heal. As long as we understand that and we respect that, then we can do a better job taking care of our bodies until it is optimal and in an optimal healing state. Okay. This isn't a doom and gloom thing, but it's just a lot of us put a lot of pressure on ourselves to jump back into feeling 100% and doing all the things and going back to work and taking on the world and going back into exercise way too quickly because we don't understand what it actually takes for our body to heal. So just some food for thought. When you're putting that pressure on yourself, remember this, because this is the truth. Okay. Next, your nervous system. Okay. So one of the ways that we can still survive and function even with all the sleep deprivation is because our nervous system has two different pathways. And your nervous system essentially is in charge of like all the functions in your body. It tells different organs and chemical messengers and hormones and all the things to do all the things. It's all about the messengers. Okay. So you have two major pathways. You have your sympathetic pathway and you have your parasympathetic pathway. When we are in labor, giving birth, and then when we're in that early postpartum phase, especially, our body is stuck in this sympathetic pathway, which is your fight or flight. A lot of cortisol is getting released, a lot of adrenaline is getting released because your body's like, we are literally fighting for our lives. We need to stay awake. We need to take care of this baby. Let's do all the things. And this is where a lot of moms, especially in the first couple of weeks postpartum, almost don't feel that bad. They're like, besides being sore, they're like, I don't feel super terrible. Like, I can do this. I only got 2 hours of sleep the last, 12 days. And like, I feel okay. And then eventually it's going to hit you a little longer. But what happens is that we kind of like get stuck on this. If you think of like these pathways as being like on a teeter-totter, you kind of get stuck with the sympathetic being turned on and you stay there. Okay. Now, eventually there's a consequence. Eventually there's an issue because we need the other pathway. Our body was not meant to forever be stuck in sympathetic. And for a lot of us, before we even get pregnant, before we even have babies, we're already stuck in this sympathetic because this gets really triggered with chronic stress, with constant stimulation, aka your phone and your TV and your computer and all the things, and artificial light and all the stuff. Okay, so we already don't do a great job in this day and age of really pulling over into that parasympathetic. And so this is something to keep in mind that we need to train to go back into parasympathetic. It's not going to happen naturally, especially if you were somebody who previous to having your baby was already kind of like an anxious, go, 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 type A, get them done tiger type person. Okay. So we really, really have to make sure that we are pulling in and prioritizing parasympathetic, which is called your rest and digest. Parasympathetic is really important. If we're not switching into parasympathetic, you're not getting restful sleep. You're not, even if you are sleeping, you're not getting restful sleep, which means we're not healing. You're also not digesting well. And we need to digest our food in order to absorb nutrients in order to heal our body. So if we're not getting into this parasympathetic, you are compromising your body's ability to heal, which means that we're going to be feeling broken longer. And again, there's going to be consequences. So how do we do this? How do we train our nervous system to kind of go back into this teeter-totter? Well, there's going to be some times that this is really helpful. Okay. And it's not just when you are stuck in traffic or you had a big argument or you feel like your heart's about to explode. Those are really great times to take a few deep breaths and calm yourself down. However, we also want to do this before every meal. We want to do it before we go to bed. Those are at least 4 times a day. If you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and going to sleep, that's at least 4 times a day that I need you to focus on training yourself to switch over into that parasympathetic. Okay. The reason to do it before we're eating is because it'll help us digest our food better. The reason to do it before we're sleeping is it'll help us get more restful sleep better. So really important to do these things. Okay. So how do we do it? We talked about when we're going to do it. Now it's how are we going to do it? Okay. You're going to start with things like breath work. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but taking like 10 deep, slow breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth before you eat your food. Really, really helpful for digestion. To do this as well before you go to bed, really helpful for sleep. Think about it. Your nervous system is going to cause your heart rate to go up. Your heart rate then causes your breath rate to go up. Okay. So what we do is we reverse engineer that. We focus on pulling your breath rate down, which then is going to pull your heart rate down, which then is going to help your body switch over to that parasympathetic. Okay. So breath work, turning off your electronics. So even if you're dog tired, your phone emits rays and your computer emits rays and your TV emits rays that keep your body up. It's also really important because not just the rays, but what you're watching, that stimulus, that constant drip of social media, that watching something new and exciting on TV, that's a dopamine drip, which is going to keep you into that sympathetic, it's going to keep you awake and alert. We want to disconnect from that. Getting outside in nature, letting your eyes see the sun or see the dark sky, even though it's getting dark at like 5 o'clock here in Michigan right now, because it's November, being able to really pull that down is really, really important. Eating undistracted. So turn off your devices. Don't work while you eat. Don't be standing around doing other things while you eat. Focus on eating and having a conversation with whoever you're with. Cold therapy. So cold showers, cold plunge, cold therapy is really helpful to shock the nervous system and get it pulled over. Legs on the wall. This is where you can kind of lay on the ground with your butt up against the wall, put your legs up on the wall. It's really helpful for lymphatic drainage, but also to stimulate that vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve is really important when it comes to parasympathetic state. Going to bed before 10 o'clock, which not always possible, but if it is possible, try to do that. Epsom salt baths, and then meditation and prayer. Very, very, very helpful. Start doing these things before you eat. I would say the deep breaths are going to be probably the main thing you can do before you eat. And then do these things, pull these into your bedtime routine. Really, really helpful. Okay, next we have asking for support. Why do we need to ask for support? We need to ask for support because your body has gone through a lot and she deserves help. And they always say it takes a village to raise a child. And it's not that I don't think raising a child is challenging and that we don't need help there, but I really think that it takes a village to support a mother. That's where we should be pulling in the village, because her body has been through a ton and mothers want to raise their children. And where we find that we're failing is when we don't have the energy or the capacity to be able to be there for our kids because we are suffering in our own bodies. And so all of these listed, and there's so many more, but these are all a bunch of issues that you could be having postpartum or at any time that require some support. digestive issues, anxiety, the inability to sleep, pelvic floor issues, pain and discomfort anywhere in the body, nutritional education and adherence, because knowing what to do and doing it are two very different things, and we might need help there. Thyroid and adrenal concerns. Thyroid and adrenals are two of the areas that produce and promote hormone function. So making sure that these guys are fully supported. The majority of thyroid issues present in women after they have babies. There's something about that. Blood sugar dysregulation, depression, exercise progression, body composition, fatigue, lack of energy, libido, and sex drive. Again, just to name a few. If you have issues in any of these areas, this is where asking for support is really helpful. So where can you find support? Okay, pelvic floor physical therapists can be seen in postpartum as well as when you're pregnant. I just talked to a mom this morning who's pregnant with her second kid, and she's already having some issues with her pelvic floor, and she still has a couple months left in her pregnancy, but she's having pain, she's having bulging. She can go see a pelvic floor PT now. It'll really help her when it comes to her delivery, but also postpartum. A postpartum doula. Some people don't know what doulas are. I'm a doula. I help women give birth. I'm a birth doula, but there are postpartum doulas who are highly educated women who come in to help support you and your baby during the postpartum time. Super, super helpful, worth every penny. Lactation consultants, postpartum mental health therapists, postpartum exercise therapists, and a functional nutrition practitioner. Okay, so how can we help? So one, I am a postpartum exercise specialist, as well as that functional nutrition practitioner, as well as a doula. So this is the area that I love. I love to help women get pregnant. I like to help women support them through pregnancy. I love to help women dive into motherhood, thriving and feeling good and supporting their bodies. Your body is so amazing. It just did the most wonderful, superpowered job in the world. And she needs love. She needs love. She needs honor. She needs support. She doesn't need to get beat up right now. She doesn't need to get ignored. She doesn't need to get pressured. She needs support. And I would love to be able to help do that in any way that I can. So if this is an area that you feel like you do need extra support in addition to what the education that I've laid out today, if you need support with any of these things, or you want to dive in deeper, then us having a conversation will be the next step. So I'd have you fill out an inquiry form, and then we would get you set up for a clarity call, which would be able to dive into where you specifically need support with, and if we are the right people to help you, or if we would need to refer you potentially to somebody else who can help you better, right? If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks for watching.